Season 1, Episode 2. And Tony, do you pronounce your name correctly? I don't know. It's Baumann.
Any way I say it is correct, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Tony Baumann.
So, but your parents would say maybe Baumann?
My parents say Baumann, but we're from German origin, and I think technically it is Baumann.
Okay.
But I've always been Baumann.
Will you respond to either?
Yeah. I might correct one of the other, but
you're not just gonna walk by someone on the street if they're like,
"Yeah, just
hey Baumann,
that ain't me.
Like, nope,
that ain't me.
That's not." Yeah. Well, welcome to the studio. We're doing it again. This is Episode 2. Made Rad by Tony is a pretty incredible a business where you're, and I'm gonna completely say it from a pretty basic perspective, but you make amazing art on mountain bikes predominantly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bikes and helmets, or really whatever anybody will send me. It's just been kind of happenstance that it ends up being on bikes and helmets.
Yep.
I'm just kind of the world I'm in, I suppose.
And you've done this all your life?
Yeah, I've pretty much customized bikes and whatever I can get my hands on since I was a baby.
Love it. So company, title, Made Rad Custom Paint Company. And I was thinking about this, and people listening might be like, oh, great. Dylan and Leo are in real estate. They brought their house painter onto the podcast. But I'm glad that we clarified that. You're predominantly painting mountain bikes, helmets, anything you can get your hands on. But I want to read your accolades, and you don't have to talk about yourself as much. But some pretty incredible names when we were looking at this list. So you've painted either bikes or helmets for Ken Block, who is an action sports icon, one of the co-founders of DC Shoes. I'm pretty sure I had a few pairs of DC Shoes back in the day.
I was a wannabe skater back in the day too. You're an actual skater, so you actually put them to use.
My AIM name was skateblonde111 at AOL.com or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I not get picked up by DC then.
Yeah. Ken Block, man. Yeah.
Shout out.
Jason Momoa, who, if people don't know who that is, Aquaman, very, very famous actor. Jill Kittner, Olympic medalist. Brent Atkinson, Troy Brosnan.
Brosnan.
Mm-hmm. If you don't have a cool last name, I guess you're not a pro mountain biker, huh? Two-time junior world champion Tawny Seagrave, Jackson Riddle, Johnny Salito, Cody Kelly, Pauline Ferrand Prevot. She's Prevot. She's French.
Super
Prevot.
French. Yeah.
I forgot the little apostrophe on it. Won world title in road bicycle racing and cyclocross. Kate Courtney, who competed with the U.S. national team. A lot of these riders, Fuji Bikes, Norco Bikes, Fox, Red Bull, some pretty prominent names. So with all those accolades, right, you didn't just jump into this world and end up, right, painting bikes for these, world-renowned mountain bikers. But tell us your story from day one to where you're at now. Were you a little kid that was doing watercolors, or how did you get into this space?
Well, I think my dad is a very great artist, so I kind of always had access to materials and was exposed to him doing stuff as a kid, so I think that just kind of got that wheel turning a bit, and they were very supportive of any kind of art thing that I wanted to do. So they would always just kick me some paints or pencil and whatever. And I just go to town for hours, which is probably pretty nice for them now that I have a kid. Because I could definitely entertain myself for a while. But I think this whole bike thing is kind of funny because I never set out to be a bicycle painter. I just painted, and then bikes were also in my life pretty much my whole life. So for them to come together was totally by accident. But my very first bike was pink, had a big basket on it, strawberry shortcake model. And it was my big sister's, and my parents gave it to me, and I was not having it. I was pretty bummed out that was going to be my first bike. I wouldn't even touch it.
On it.
I did have a basket, but it was like white and flowery. Like it wasn't me,
Yeah.
So my dad brilliantly just started shaking up a can of spray paint and sprayed the whole thing blue. And then I was stoked. Yeah. I turned around.
Keep the basket?
You kept the basket. Yeah. Now it had blue flowers, but it all blended in, so it wasn't as, in your face. And yeah, I was stoked. I was stoked on that bike. So even my very first bike was custom painted. And from then on, I always kind of customized whatever bike I had in whatever way I could, whether that was painting stuff or swapping parts or pulling decals off or cutting my own decals or whatever. I was always trying to make things more mine, you know? So yeah, that's kind of where I think the bikes and art kind of first collided for me. And that was just always kind of a side thing. You know, I'd paint stuff for myself, I'd paint stuff for friends, but it was never like a goal of mine to be like a bike painter. Didn't even know that was an actual thing. So then I went to college, went to school for graphic design and entrepreneurship. And while I was in college, I was dabbling in the street arts of it.
Where'd you go to college? Let's give them a shout out.
I went to school in Western Carolina,
Okay.
in North Carolina, kind of deep in
I didn't know West Carolina was a state.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, weird, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, north, east, yeah. Yeah, so I went to school in Western Carolina and kind of started getting in a little trouble there. I was never one to make the best decisions. So my mom kind of picked up on this whole graffiti thing that I was kind of getting into and kind of wanted to hone my focus a bit. Bought me my first airbrush, which definitely helped. Thanks, Mom. And then I just kind of spent hours trying to figure that thing out. I had a little apartment and one of the bedrooms was kind of set up as like a little art studio. So yeah, just kind of toyed around with that. Again, still painted helmets and bikes and stuff. Yeah, skip a little while. I finally graduated. I'd always been working in bike shops since I was a little kid. So that was kind of a natural place for me to land at any time I needed employment. Yeah, so I got a job at a bike shop, painted some stuff. People saw some stuff, asked me to paint some stuff for them.
It's like a slow creep of.
It was a slow creep.
You following your passion, and then people going, "Holy shit, you're really good at this!" And then they told one more person, and then they hit you up, and you're like, "Okay, yeah, sure."
Yeah.
What was that like? Was it a slow takeover, or was it just like this? It's going so well, or so many people start to reach out to you about it that you can't ignore it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it just always, like, I'd always done this. I've always painted stuff for myself, and occasionally I'd get a buddy to be like, "Hey, man, I'm getting a new helmet. Can you like throw something on this for me?"
Yeah.
I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." I didn't really think anything about it at this point. It was just kind of like, yeah, I've just kind of always done this. It wasn't until so I went to school, graduated school, got a job at a bike shop while I was in school. And then they had another location in Asheville, North Carolina, Motion Makers bike shop. If you're out there, what's up, guys? So they pulled me over to Asheville when I graduated, worked there for a little while. I was really like getting all right, I'm graduated. I need to do something.
Right.
Snowboarding is probably the second big passion that I have besides art and bikes. So I moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
Great place to do it.
It was awesome. I could walk to the gondola, and my work had like a 2-hour buffer if there was more than a foot of snow the night before. So you could get some turns in and then show up to work super late. So that was always great. But while I was there, I was still like, all right, what am I going to do? Like, I need to do something. So I applied for a job at Specialized Bicycles in Morgan Hill, California. So yeah, at Specialized, I was part of their retailer development program. It's called SBCU, which was Specialized Bicycle Component University. I would take bike shop employees, and they would come to Morgan Hill for 3 days out of the week, and I would be their tour guide, introducing them to key players and at Specialized, kind of show them the facilities. I had all these stories I told, and take them on bike rides. So yeah, it was basically like I was sponsored, but I didn't have to be that good.
Dream job.
I kind of imagine this as like, not to downplay the role, but like, when you go to a college campus and you have the tour guide, right? That's like,
The hype man.
you have the hype man for the college, right? And you're
totally.
like, and you go to on different tours, and there's a tour guide that's not very good or maybe hungover, but then you got that hype man that you're like, I want to go to this college because everyone's like this dude.
Yeah.
It's got to be. So I imagine you were pretty good at that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good comparison there.
Yeah.
I was definitely the hype man, which was good because to a lot of these bike shop employees, I was the face of Specialized, So if I was having a bad day, grumpy, hungover, whatever, it did not reflect well on the whole brand. And then after they went back to their bike shop, I was their contact. So if they had any questions about anything or just wanted to say what's up or tell me like a story of something that was relevant to them that happened at Specialized, but they took it back to the bike shop and like sold a bike from that, I would get it all. So it was super fun. Definitely the hype man.
So Specialized to kind of, Made Rad, what's filling the gap there? And let's also put a timeline on all of this, right? When you were in college, obviously you started, throwing stuff on helmets and bikes at a young age, right? When you got that first bike from your older sister. But let's get some timelines, because I think the biggest thing for people listening to this to understand is that this stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? So I love to hear the timelines and just how much work and effort and time was put into this.
Yeah, so I started college in 2004 or 5, and then it took me probably about 5 years to get through it.
That's normal.
Yeah, so that puts me at 2010. So then I was in Steamboat from 2010-ish to only for a year, so to 2011, and then I got my job at Specialized February of 2012. Okay. And then
so that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
That's when you were born, right?
Yeah.
Wow, dude, you're looking old for 10-year-old, man.
I had a big growth spurt early.
It just popped up real quick.
Yeah. But my hairline is still going back. It's weird at 10 years old.
Yeah, funny how that works. Genetics, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then when I was at Specialized, I just did what I'd always done. And, I would get a bike or a helmet and I would paint it for myself. And I was face to face with so many people there that I started getting little inquiries like, hey man, did you paint that? Like, where'd you get that helmet? Can you paint me one? I'd be like, sure. Yeah, I can paint you a helmet. So I painted, I think I painted a helmet for myself. Keely, my wife, was actually the intern in my department.
That's how you met.
There you go. A little forbidden fruit there. But I think I painted something for her maybe. And then there was a guy who was an ex-pro rider, but he worked in the suspension lab. And he would still do some bigger events, and his name was pretty well known. And he kind of popped down and he was like, hey, I got this big race at an event called Sea Otter, and I need 2 helmets. Do you think you could paint them for me? It's like, yeah, sure. What do you want? He's like, whatever you want to do, whatever. Just like paint them. Like, all right. Which those projects are always, they used to really stress me out. When they gave me 0 guidelines to work with, I usually like something, like give me like a color or a feeling,
figure, like, or
anger.
You want an angry helmet? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah,
I can do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when you're just like, whatever, it's like, all right, well, if you hate it, then can't blame me for it. But so I painted 2 helmets for him, and then that I think was kind of when things started to get noticed a bit more, just because he was somewhat of a bigger name. So he was, face to face with other people. And then a kid from a bike shop saw some stuff I painted and asked me if I could paint his bike frame, and he wanted it Galaxy themed. I was like, sure, that sounds cool. I've never painted Galaxy before. Like, that'd be sweet. So I did that. And then at the time, Specialized still has a road bike called the Tarmac. And a guy who I worked with was like, hey, can you paint me a Galaxy themed Tarmac, and we'll call it the Starmac.
Nice.
Yeah, sure. I can paint a Starmac. So I did that. And then in the meantime, other little projects are kind of sprinkling in here and there. I was working out of a carport that I bought from Harbor Freight in my backyard, and I just cut a hole in the back with a box fan, and was just out there in the gravel with flip-flops on and sweating my ass off and painting stuff. And then that Tarmac started getting some recognition, especially on Instagram and stuff. That thing got shared all over the place. So then when Ken Block's livery came out that year, and it was all Galaxy themed, and Specialized had kind of always supplied him with bikes, and it was time to give him a new one. The guy from their PR team came down, and he was like, hey, I know you've done some Galaxy stuff. Do you think it would be possible for you to paint this one? And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Just thinking it was like every other project, Hey,
so you didn't know it was for Ken Block?
Not at the time.
Because holy shit, what a name, and what a
I mean, that was like, yeah, and I just kind of like took it and was just like, yeah, sure, just like leave it beside my desk. I'll deal with it later. It was like working.
I
And
have
then
to show other
he was
people
like,
around.
actually, to let you know, this one's for Ken Block.
You should
I was
probably
like,
get on
wait,
this. Yeah.
Ken, like the car driver? It's like, yeah, we give him a bike every year, and this is going to be his new one.
So
this year.
besides like the ex-pro guy, right? If we take him out of the equation and the little bike shop, I mean, Ken Block really was like the first big name, and that's a big name.
It was a
huge name.
It was a huge name, and it was probably the one job that I had that like gave me the momentum to at least like boost my confidence enough to be like, I think this might actually be like a thing. Like I might be able to do this. Just because as soon as I handed it off to Ken Block and he posted about it and tagged me, my like inbox was just boom, like total, like that 1 minute was just like overnight was getting inquiries that like I couldn't keep up with from people from all over the place.
Yeah.
Like other brands, other people. It was like a big deal.
Was there any guidance on like what he wanted his bike to look like?
It
Or was it another one like, hey, put hot dogs on there, put donuts, whatever. I don't give a shit.
Yeah,
you know,
it was
like,
the Galaxy ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, they
gotcha.
were just like, yeah, just paint this up like your like all the other Galaxy bikes that you've done so far. Like make this one over the top and definitely a showpiece. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Still, I painted it in that carport in my backyard. Even though Specialized has a paint booth and like a full on like studio where they can make anything, whether it's like aluminum, carbon, steel, paint, whatever. I just wanted to do it on kind of my own time because I was at Specialized all day, every day. Wanted to go home, and it was and it was still like not a job for me, you know. And it being at Specialized would have kind of felt like it was still like part of the job. I just had fun painting stuff.
Or your thing was becoming a part of their thing, which is there's nothing wrong with that, but this is 100% your thing.
Totally, yeah.
So I don't, Leo and I are definitely fikers, right? We're fake bikers, even though we live really close by Galbraith. It almost feels criminal, right?
Yeah,
like,
criminal, yeah.
World-renowned mountain biking mountain. And, but I just want to understand this industry a little bit better because, I watch a lot of NFL, soccer, and I feel like this is kind of, when the football players have the custom cleats,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like in NFL, they always take picture of those or zoom in on them and they're custom painted on whatever it is. Someone passed away, right? A famous person, they put it on the shoe. Is the biking industry similar where they go to these events, right? You have the ex-pro guy, you have Ken Block, you have, some of these first one. Are they going to these events and they want to have the coolest helmet, they want to have the coolest frame, they don't want to have something that somebody else has? Is that kind of how it works? Is that why they came to you?
Yeah, I think so. Especially with something like that. I mean, they're trying to get, so from Specialized perspective, they're trying to get as much coverage on this bike as possible. It's not like they're just going to hand over a bike and then never see anything from it. Like, even though like monetarily a bike to them is pretty small, and that person would be super stoked to have a bike. But if it's a full-blown custom bike that matches Ken Block's livery for that year, and like it's a big thing, they know this guy's going to push it and actually ride it. That dude shredded. So that was like a big kind of PR move, basically. But with athletes, some athletes write in their contracts that they want custom, like 3 custom bikes a year. So some people can build it into their contracts. Other people are like, there's a big event and they just want to kind of stand out from the crowd. So they're going to do something custom because that'll pull more attention. And then if somebody wins on that custom bike and it's held over their head on the podium, like that's a big deal.
Like I painted that, dude. I painted that.
Yeah. And even as a kid, like stock bike paint jobs are typically pretty boring. Like it's lots of solid colors and whatever. Like, so biking's supposed to be like a fun thing. So to make it so to like bland, and they're expensive too. Bikes are like, you can spend as much money as you can think of on a bike. 18 grand to buy a road bike. It has no motor, skinny tires. Like that's a lot of money to drop on a bike.
Toothpick, but
yeah. So yeah, I think just like kind of adding some flavor into it. Like its style is like always something people are kind of after. So if you're the top dog or trying to be, or at least want to look like them, you got to have some custom shit.
So let me ask you this. This is always a big curiosity for me when it comes to art and business when they collide, right? Because there's the side of being an artist where you're like, I'm in my flow, I'm doing my thing. Don't mess with my flow. I'm gonna do this today, or I'm doing this custom job, or whatever it is. And then it intersects with being a business, running a business and monetizing it, right? And tell me a little bit more about like, how did you start out like pricing it? Where you're like, oh, they're gonna pay you a couple $100, and I'm sure it was more than that, or was it like, no, this I'm pretty clear on what this is gonna cost. This is how much my supplies are. This is what it should cost. And has that changed over time?
Yeah. I think it's kind of constantly changing. When I first started out, friends would just hand me stuff and I would just paint it. Just like, I like doing this stuff.
Pro bono.
It's what I'm doing anyway. Like, yeah. And I would love to get some stuff on a helmet, it's fun. And then while I was at Specialized, I was fortunate enough to have an incredible boss. And he was super supportive. And he's the one who like sat me down. He like scheduled a meeting during the normal work day and was like, hey, we need to like sit down. I know that you're super passionate about this. You want to do this. Let's like crunch some numbers, see if this is even possible. And the numbers that we kind of came up with, I was like, there's no way people would pay that. Like at that time, I was definitely kind of selling out of my own pocket. Like there's no way I could afford that. How could anybody else afford that? That's like ridiculous. But he was very adamant. Like, hey, if you want to do this, like you have the skill to do it. You just have to get your stuff out there enough that the right people see it and are willing to pay whatever you ask them to pay for it. And it's always kind of been a struggle for me. Even like when I was working in a bike shop, somebody's like, hey, I want a mountain bike. I've been riding for 6 years, I would kind of shy away from the whole budget conversation just because I was broke, doesn't mean that they're broke.
Right.
So I would steer them towards like the most budget efficient bike I could. But really they had a pocket full of cash and they could have paid for whatever bike I pointed them to. So it's kind of the same thing. I had to wrap my head around people have more money than I do. A lot of people. I did not get into this to get rich, but I need to have my time covered in materials. And I put so much time and effort into all this that I've really kind of honed my process of things and kind of the effort that I put into it. I pretty much max out almost on any project, really, no matter what the budget is, just because I want it to look good when it's coming out of my shop. So yeah, it's a fine balance, it's a fine balance. Trying not to spend too much time on things, but I also want them to like be sweet.
Yeah. Is it is it a kind of time and materials type pricing, or are you setting a budget ahead of time and saying, hey, if you want, let's just use Ken Block, hey, you want a Galaxy bike, this is what it's going to cost you. You're kind of pricing it out ahead of time. Or are you saying, hey, I'll look at what it takes me, time and materials, add a little, profit on that, and then give you kind of a price at the end?
It's always like a very mixed bag when I'm trying to come up with a price. Because yeah, of course now that I've done it for, 8-9 years full time, I've done quite a bit of projects. Like I've pumped out a ton of bikes at this point. So I have a rough idea of how long something will probably take me. There's always some variables in there. So I think about time. I also think about, is it a brand new bike? Is it a bike somebody's already ridden? Are there chips and scratches and dings and other stuff I have to? Yeah. Do I need to fully strip it down? Like, what's that going to be like? Is it a full suspension bike with multiple parts that are moving and rubbing on each other? Or is it a hardtail, no fork? Am I painting the fork, not painting the fork? There's always these kind of things coming up. And then it's also based on the idea that somebody has. If it's a cool idea and I like really can get behind it and I want to do it, I'll work with them a bit to like make sure that that project ends up in the shop. If it's a bad idea, and I'm just like, I am
kind of like tattoos, right?
Yeah, totally. I am not into doing this, but I'll throw out a ridiculous price. And if they're like, sure, I'm like, all right, I guess it'll be worth it.
I mean, what's the process, right? Once again, for Fikers over here that, and I've never painted anything in my life.
Biker right here. I'm a real biker.
What's the process look like? Give us a timetable, I guess, of, hey, I'm working 8 hours a day to paint a frame. It's going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, right? I guess, what does that look like?
Yeah. So typically I get an email. Email is definitely the best way to contact me. DMs and stuff, I get really lost if they're in there. So yeah, I get an email. Somebody's like, hey, I'm thinking about getting a custom painted bike. I got a new bike. I got an old bike, like whatever. What's your, like, how much is it going to cost is always the first question. So then I shoot over a pretty generic pricing breakdown. So it's like simple ranges from about $1,200 to $2,200. Intermediate is like 22 to $4,000. Advanced is 4 to however much you can afford. And then it's broken down by like simplicity or complexity. Is it more masking and airbrushing work, or is it just masking bearing surfaces, sanding it, polishing it, and sending it back? So that I send that kind of generic thing, and a lot of times that'll scare people off, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's way too much than I wanted to spend." And I'm like, "Cool, no worries. It too much. It would be more than I would want to
You
spend."
should ride your stock bike.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Just go ride it.
yeah, exactly. So then they could be like, "All right, well, I can see it. I can make the intermediate level work. So here's a few ideas that I'm thinking," and then they'll shoot over some inspiration photos or whatever to kind of just like get the wheels turning, kind of see where they are. I really try to get as much information from them off the bat as possible. So colors, if you want like mountain theme, or, I want my dog's portrait on there or whatever. Give me as much information as possible. And then I can kind of go from there and be like, all right, well, I can see this would be probably fitting in like this range. Like, is there somewhere that you kind of need to be from that? And then they'll be like, yeah, you kind of need to be like right here. I'm like, all right, well, a $500 deposit would hold your spot in the calendar. I'll kind of like block that out for your project. It's typically 3 to 5 months I'm booked out. And it's just me. And then I have a guy who helps me do some prep work a couple times a week. So things go slow, but I also like really want to take my time on things. I really hate rushing it. And if anything has like a really hard deadline that I might not make, then I'll just say no, because things happen, especially with paint stuff. It's like you can get a bad batch of paint and you've done the same thing for, 40 bikes before. And now you do it on this one and it all just like disintegrates and cracks and crumbles. And you're like, what? And you got to start all over. So like if there's it's such a mind game really, because it's not really about like how good of a painter you are. It's about how good you can cover your mistakes, because they're going to happen. So you just have to really like pivot and know a few different routes around whatever is going to come up.
Let's talk about perfectionism. Excuse me. You talk about wanting to make sure things are right. At what point do you go, like when you've spun around, you've looked at the bike from the same angles over and over and over, and you go, all right, I got to get this out. What's that tipping point for you?
So that one's like it has to do with kind of a balance of how much time I put into it versus how happy or nitpicky I am with the thing. And once I get to a point where I'm like, I definitely maxed out my hours on this, and I'm pretty happy with it. Like Keely's really good at being like, that is fine. Like that is like, nobody will ever notice that. Like that is like the tiniest little blown edge underneath a piece of tape. Yeah. Like it just needs one like extra glow. So yeah, it's just kind of a balance again. It's like, yeah, of course I want it to be perfect, but I also burn out working on things. So at some point I'm just like, all right, like they're going to be stoked on this. As long as I'm pretty confident that they're going to be super happy with what we discussed and what I came out with, then it's time to go.
So I guess where my interest is like with things that are artistic, right? There's kind of this intrinsic value with them, right? I guess the analogy I'll use is like, let's say the Mona Lisa, right? Some people might look at that and say it's a picture of a chick.
That's
big
what
deal.
I would say. I would say it's a picture of a chick.
And so, other people say it's one of the greatest wonders of the world, and they all wait at the museum and want to look at it and take photos of it. How hard is it to scale this business? Because once again, when we're talking about perfection and we're talking about, you're 3 to 5 months out, some of these projects are taking you a few months, I'm assuming. A few weeks to a few
I would
months.
say I spend on average probably like 40 hours on a paint job. There's definitely some simple ones that are less than that. But I'd say like a good kind of happy spot is about 40 hours when you add in like prep and
Is that for like an
finish work and stuff.
intermediate one or for a basic?
Yeah, that's kind of like that's like the average paint job that I do is like probably right in the higher end of the intermediate price point there.
So yeah, I guess like the there's a lot of people that want to get into business and want to figure out how to scale it, right? And make more money, and then also like get their artwork out there at a bigger scale. Are you happy with kind of where you're at in the business? Are you wanting to scale this business? If so, have you thought about how you're going to do that?
This is a terrible business model.
Yeah.
It is not a business.
It's a one-man show.
It's a one-man show, and I only have so much time, and it's just it's more for the love of doing it, I suppose. I definitely get burned out a bit when I'm just like working and working and working and working, and there's like no real like goal to get to with this thing. I mean, there's definitely a few different routes. I could hire more people. I could kind of go into more of like product side where I'm actually like selling things that have designs but are made from a factory,
like
or
designs,
kind of more mass produced type stuff, which I would totally be into. And I have some fun projects in the works that are kind of heading that way, which will be great. But yeah, really, it's like as the business sits now, it's if I'm not working, I'm not getting paid, and it's and it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. And now that I have a 18-month-old, I don't really want to work till 3 a.m. anymore and hit these hard deadlines and stuff. I'd much rather have a hard start and stop time and be done with it outside of that parameter.
So let's talk about that, because I think we all are in, at different staggering stages, staggered stages, because 18, 6 months, Cruz is 2.5 months. Yeah. So, and we all understand what you'll probably explain, but
our babies are actually all hanging out just right outside this door.
My baby's in the car.
Yeah, right? we just left them on the floor. Don't tell the wives, you know.
Yeah. But like, how did you, the moment you had your kid, you're running a successful business, you're getting calls out the yin yang, people are like, you're 3 to 5 months out, and you go, this is my deadline, this is the amount of time I need to take. However, now there's a new layer to your life, which is this a little boy or girl. Oh man, I have a little girl. Yeah, keep this kid away from her precious little girl. But I think the whole point is like, what was that moment like for you when you had your kid, and you're like, how can I love something or think something is, or prioritize something more than my marriage or my business or my friends or whatever it is, and then you have this kid. Tell me about that moment as a business owner.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. She's a handful. And like before having her, I would seriously work any moment I had. I was like in the shop working. And I liked it. It's like something that I like to do. I make my space pretty comfortable and like inviting, and I got tunes playing and whatever. It's like a good vibe for a work environment. But now with her, I don't want to be out there that long. It's fun now to like be like, all right, 5 o'clock, I'm out, and like I have no issue. Like I'm not craving to go back to the shop and work after that, even though a lot of times I have to put her to bed and then I got to go back out and work till midnight. But I'm trying to lessen those projects as much as possible. But yeah, it's definitely a balance. And we have childcare 3 days a week. So, and my wife is also self-employed. So it's definitely a delicate balance trying to make sure we got all corners covered. But yeah, it's nice. Like my Tuesday, I spend completely with her. So I'm always have so much fun on Tuesdays. I'm like planning, all right, I'm going to take her here. We're going to go do this. We're going to check that out. Oh, got to make her breakfast, lunch. It's like a full dad day, which is super rad. And I'm very fortunate enough to be able to do that. Then Thursdays, my wife and I split. So I have her in the morning, she comes home, and then I work in the evenings. So I am getting to spend some good time, but basically what this means is that prices just went up.
Yep. Your hours went down. Your prices just went
Thanks,
up.
Exactly.
Pepper.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Tony's
Thanks.
prices just went up.
I should have bumped them up earlier, you know.
She's got expensive habits.
Yeah, she really does. Yeah.
Well, what do you think she thinks that you do?
I have no idea.
Because it's not like she doesn't think you're going to some office and sitting in a cubicle.
I mean, I don't even know if she knows what an office and cubicle is. You know, she like she'll come out to the shop and I've got dirt bikes in there. I've got motorcycles and all these bikes and like just a big workspace, big workbench, tools on the wall. Like it's like a very as a kid, I can imagine that it's like a lot going on in there, and she just walks around and it's like bike, 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 and then she like wants to sit on one of the motorcycles, and then she wants to like walk into the paint booth, and I'm like, no, you gotta kind of stay out of here.
Yeah.
I had a swing in there for her for a while, but when I'm spraying paint, she can't be in there anyway, so try to keep her out of the toxic zones as much as I can. Yeah. But who knows what she thinks I do.
What so like at Specialized, I'm assuming in some capacity you were salary, hourly, things like that, right? Now you're self-employed. Talk about that, right? You have that flexibility. You have the dad day on Tuesdays. You have half the day on Thursdays. Could you ever go back to a 9 to 5 per se?
I mean, sometimes I'm like really craving like the structure and the security of a 9 to 5, because if all of a sudden people don't want custom paint jobs, like I'm SOL. I pretty much put a lot of effort and time into this, and I realized that it could dwindle at any moment. So yeah, at certain points I'm definitely like, oh man, should I apply? Like there's jobs that pop up and I'm like, oh, I think I'd probably be pretty good at that. So I'm definitely like curious, but when it comes down to it, no, man, I really like to be able to spend my days how I feel like I need to. Whether that's like we have a house emergency where I have to like replace the septic tank or whatever, it's nice to be able to be like, all right, well, this is what I'm doing today. I don't have to, hey George, can I like take the day off? I got like
George. George is everyone's boss.
Steve's boss. Well, like what's next for Made Rad, right? I mean, obviously we read the accolades, Aquaman to Olympians to, I mean, you've painted bikes and helmets and done artwork for an array of just big names in the space. What's next? Are you like, I want to reach this audience. I want to, scale my business to this size. I want to pull back a little bit. Like what's next for Made Rad? And if you haven't checked out his website while we're talking through this, maderad.com, look at all this artwork. I mean, it's incredible.
And Instagram too, because it's right there. Your whole gallery is just right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my website, I try to update like at least once a year, get all the projects up for that year. I haven't made it to this past year, so Instagram has more current stuff. If you want to check that out, Made Rad by Tony on Instagram. So what's next? I really feel like I'm gonna start kind of scaling back the random enthusiast a bit, just because I really like doing those projects, and a lot of the really unique and wild paint jobs that I have done, I would have never been able to come up with. It's somebody who comes to me with an idea, and then I have to figure out kind of how to execute it. And I really like that. I wouldn't have come up with, probably 75% of the bikes I've painted without these ideas coming in. But I think that the time that I spend answering these emails, going back and forth, trying to really hone in on exactly what somebody's wanting,
like getting to know them.
Yeah, it's totally like an interview process. Like we're starting to date, and I need to like get into their head.
You're online dating. You can only online date for so long.
I know, you get so tired.
You gotta jump on the phone, or you gotta meet in person.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I rarely paint anything for anybody local. They're shipping their stuff to me from all over the place, so that face-to-face time that would cut down hours of this back and forth just isn't really realistic. So I've been fortunate enough to kind of position myself as probably one of the more well-known people who are doing this in the bike industry. So I'm getting more and more brands contacting me to do stuff on a semi-regular basis, which has been very nice. And it gives me a little bit of security in a very like unsecure job that I've created for myself. So that's pretty nice. And also kind of trying to bring things more as kind of like mass produce, but still limited. I want to keep everything very limited. I don't want to do big runs of really anything. I think that kind of having that, um, that like, there's
Limited
only
edition,
there's
yeah.
only
One.
so many of these.
Yeah.
I really like to keep it that way, and that kind of helps things just not get out of hand and blow up and see it everywhere and not be custom at that point.
Yeah. You've built this clout, right? And if you go on your Instagram, you can see and people that are in the biking world are probably, and they know these names better than Leo and I do. But what I guess, when I'm, what is next for you? It's really like, anyone listening to this, right, that maybe is an artist themselves, like if you had to attribute one moment, one piece, one relationship, that just really catapulted your career per se, that broke you into getting in front of all these people, I guess, what would that be? Because there's a lot of talented people out there, a lot of talented artists. Doesn't have to be in just the painting bike space, right? But what was that one moment, if you had to boil it down, to that kind of catapulted your career into where it's at?
Are you referring to a tipping point?
Yeah, tipping point. I wanted to say tipping. Yeah. I'm trying to beat around tipping point without saying tipping point.
Turning point.
Turning, catapult.
Yeah. So I think that there's no way I would be where I am without meeting one person. And it was my best friend when I was like 12 years old. He's the one who kind of got me into the whole mountain bike things. Like, yeah, I've ridden a bike since I could ride a bike, and I've been painting them since I could paint. But I was never like an enthusiast for cycling. It was just like things you do as a kid, But I met this one guy named Jack when we were about 12, and he had like the first real mountain bike I'd ever seen. It was a full suspension bike when we were 12, which was like
with the coils and everything.
Yeah, it had a coil shock on it, and I'd ridden dirt bikes since I was like 6 or 7, but had never seen a bike with one of those shocks on it, and I was just like mind blown when he like pulled up and skidded at my feet with that thing. Just like, what is this thing? So then, seeing him with that bike really made me get some bike envy. My parents were not going to buy me a $2,000 bike when I was 12 years old. So that kind of forced me to get a job at a bike shop when I was 12. And I was just working for shop credit, just trying to like get a bike. And then we started racing bikes. And then that's kind of when I started seeing, like, we would go to big national races and we'd see these big pros with all custom bikes or like just really unique type stuff that people had. So it made me want to kind of customize my stuff. And that's kind of where it all really snowballed kind of early on. So that without that happening, without me meeting Jack, that would be like, this wouldn't be a thing for sure. With the whole bike thing, I think just like really not knowing where I'm going, what I want to do, but I had so much time spent towards bikes that Specialized kind of pulled me in, and I was like, I need to be there. Like I need to, whatever I can do. Like I'm gonna work there one day.
Yeah.
Not really having this goal of painting stuff in mind, but just like wanted to be in that culture and like work there and see who I can meet, see what's next, and all that stuff. So I would say those are two pretty large tipping points, if you will.
Tipping points. You said it.
Yeah.
Coined it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I just wanted to jump into really quickly that you had talked about with your studio is you had this state-of-the-art studio, and then you had your studio where you were comfortable. And I think entrepreneurs get stuck in this space of like, everything has to be perfect. I have to have all of the money in the world to be able to do a marketing campaign. And one of the things that you've shown is passion and like just maybe borderline obsession with it, right? Which is a good thing as an entrepreneur. But you've also but you've also you've made the statement that you don't need everything to be perfect. In fact, it's actually more of a happy place as an entrepreneur to not have everything perfect. What message would you give to other entrepreneurs about feeling like you need the perfect setup, the perfect platform to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case, I was doing this and didn't know what the perfect setup was. It was just like, I want to paint stuff, so let me get a place that is dry and I have enough room to move around. I got power and lights in there. And then from there, I'd be like, okay, well now, I can see how like having proper ventilation is probably a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
So let's figure out that. I think just kind of taking the step forward and then seeing what it's like from there. Like, yeah, maybe you have an idea of like, all right, this is perfect for me now, but I'm back here. So just working that way. And then realizing that things change all the time. Your situation will change, or the place that you are able to work out of will change, and just being able to pivot and really be creative with solutions, I think, is a very important side of an entrepreneur.
I think this leads into what we always want to ask anyone that we have on this, right? I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, successful people, or I guess people before they're successful, spinning their wheels, for lack of a better term, right?
Well done.
You like that?
Yeah.
That was good.
That was really
Mhm.
good.
Are spinning their wheels, right? Like Leo said, they want the perfect setup. They want they're afraid to put themselves out there, right? Like what you were doing was artistic, but it was yours, right? If you didn't put yourself out there and say, yeah, I'll paint this bike for Ken Block. I mean, that's a huge name. You wouldn't be, where you're at today. So what we always ask, anyone is just for anyone listening to this, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone that's maybe facing kind of a personal or a professional tipping point? They don't know which direction to go. They don't know how to put themselves out there. They keep spinning their wheels. What's a piece of advice that you would give them?
I'd just say yes more than you say no. At any crossroad, there's like two ways to go about it. And if you say no to a person, like, hey, you want to grab lunch? And you're like, nah, that ends that crossroad right there. So yeses always lead to more things. No's kind of shut things down. So when people were really advocating for me to quit my job at Specialized, my like dream job, with security and salary and all the benefits, and start up a business from scratch, I could have easily been like, no. And I probably, like, my parents would have appreciated it if I did say no. But I said yes, and I just kind of kept moving. And the first paint booth I built here was collapsible because I had a garage, 1-car garage, and I didn't know if this was going to work. So I wanted to be able to fold it up and it be gone if for some reason I had to get another job. Luckily, that booth never closed down. I always had it out. But yeah, I would just say, just keep saying yes to things, keep exploring, and just see what's out there. Things change all the time, and got to roll with the punches.
I love that. Yeah, the minute you say no, you close down that path. But you also need to protect your time. I think there's a time and a place to say no, right?
Yeah.
You can't say yes. You can't say yes to every email you get in your inbox,
right?
Because you have a finite amount of time and resources, and what you do is a perfection.
But at first, I was saying yes to anything that was coming at me. Yeah.
Can you paint my kid's little bike? It's got the frills off the handles, and
that's
you're like, that's going to cost.
That's a throwback.
That's going to cost $3,500.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, nah.
Well, for anyone listening to this, once again, if this hasn't driven you to Tony's website or Instagram, can you just let us know what it is again? What's your Instagram? What's your website where people can find you?
Yep, maderad.com is the website. Made Rad by Tony is my Instagram. That's pretty much it. You can email me at maderadbytony@gmail.com. Yeah, that's it. That's me.
Love it. Love it. What's real quick? What's a project you're working on right now that we may see on your Instagram in the next, let's say, few weeks?
What is coming up? So I painted, let's see, what would be something juicy?
Yeah, give us the juicy
Yeah,
one.
I mean, I had pretty much free range on this road bike that I just sent to a bike shop down in Miami. And it's kind of a style that I've been kind of honing over the last few years, of when people kind of give me, a blank stare when I'm like, what do you want? And it's just been a super fun thing to kind of work on. It's a very kind of meshed together vibe, but it's fun. You'll see it.
Okay, it's coming soon.
Coming soon.
We got to follow you on Instagram.
I got to edit some photos and then I'll put it up there. Yeah.
when it pops out, check our Instagram because we'll reshare that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love, if you haven't seen Tony's Instagram too, he looks like Breaking Bad when he's painting the bikes. He's got the whole like white suit on,
Yeah.
you know.
Chemicals,
It's pretty rad.
Mm.
It's pretty rad.
Yeah. Well, Tony, thank you for coming on. This is we haven't gotten canceled yet.
Yay.
Yeah,
That's good.
it's episode 2.
This might do it for you.
This
Yeah.
might do it. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you went over the edge a couple times, made all this really uncomfortable.
Nah,
No,
sorry
I'm just
about
kidding.
that,
It was really nice having you in the studio, and
Yeah, thanks.
I appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, we're gonna get a tipping point bike once we start making money on this thing,
There you
right?
go.
Yeah.
We
There
need to
you
make a few
go.
thousand
With
bucks.
training wheels.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
there
getting a
you
tipping
go.
point bike, that's for sure.
Mhm.